Learning is experience. Everything else is just information. That quote by Albert Einstein communicates the change that many are calling for in education. For project-based learning, experiential learning, in short, learning by doing. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought about an opportunity to improve the way we learn and how we prepare our next generation of industry leaders. I am excited about today's conversation because we're focused on genomics in K-12 education. Welcome to Design to Disrupt and Reimagine Education. The Edupreneur Roundtable brings together education-focused entrepreneurs monthly, and we assemble them. They're in the realm of identifying, analyzing opportunities in education, and we apply intentional, responsive, and active listening to build trust across various education stakeholder groups. So we'd like to know who is in this space. We are hybrid, so we have some individuals that are in the room, and you're with us virtually. So there are polling questions that Emily will post up for you. How do you identify female, male, non-binary, or you can prefer not to say? And we'll wait on those results to come in. Here in the room, we are females are rocking. Beautiful. So it's 50-50 online. Great. On to the next question. How do you identify? Which education stakeholder group do you most closely align yourself with? Are you a student, parent, educator, or interested community member? Me, I'm a parent. What about you, Siobhan? How do you identify?
Parent, yeah.
And the results online. There is one interested community member, and then even split between parent and educator. On to the next question. Do you identify as an education-focused entrepreneur? No? No. Okay, well, we'll go on to the topic of today's session. So what's your level of familiarity with genomics? Do you know a little? Are you slightly more familiar? Do you consider yourself well-versed? Or there may be a few experts in the room. We know you're the expert in the room. So it looks like most of us, including me, know very little. So, and the next question, and I will read it from the screen, so I don't get it wrong. Okay, this is about the priority that we should set on adopting genomic education. So how quickly should we adopt genomic lessons into K-12 education? So we have three choices. Adoption shouldn't be a priority. Our region can wait 1 to 3 years before adoption, or adopt now. What say you, Siobhan? Now?
We're ready.
And everyone, wow, what about in the room? Adopt now? We're all adoption?
Yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna try this. Help me out if I get it wrong. Clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic repeats, CRISPR, and the associated enzyme Cas9 is a technology that sparked today's conversation that started between you and I, Siobhan. So before I introduce you, I'd actually like to introduce our two speakers who are remote. So Phil Brooks. Phil, welcome.
Thank you. Hello. Good evening.
You know, I love to read a short bio, right? So everyone knows. So Phil Brooks is a native of West Philadelphia who has served the city in roles that include AmeriCorps Program City Year Philadelphia, the Mayor's Office of Education Program Manager of STEM Initiatives, the Commerce Department's Talent Development Unit, and the City of Philadelphia's citywide STEM program. So Phil, I know you're currently here at the University City Science Center Workforce Partnerships. So where does genomics fit into the greater Philadelphia region's industry fabric?
Yep. So that's a complicated question, but also an easy question. I will add that I've never been an educator or a genomics expert myself, but I've had lots of conversations and lots of experience with both, more on the education side. I would say in conversations with companies and communities, they're looking for well-rounded talent, right? And that well-rounded talent can come from a number of different avenues, different pathways. Genomics is one of those very important topics. And in my experience, I've learned this a little bit more just through talking with educators, that it's placed in high school kind of biology. And it's definitely something that could boost the number of opportunities that an individual, whether it's a graduating high school student or a person just going into the science or a quote unquote STEM or STEAM field, and boost their amount or ability to get an opportunity. Knowing this type of kind of very specific part of science is truly important. I guess I'll talk a little bit later on about how it focuses on helping students with decision-making skills and teamwork and all those things. But this definitely has a big place within industry, even if industry doesn't specifically say it out at the top of the hill, hey, we need genomics talent right now. It's still really important in all of the facets of their operations.
It is. And getting there is going to take all hands on deck, especially with our educators, our classroom teachers. So the next person joining us virtually is Shirley. Shirley Posey Jackson is a master educator who serves as the department chair for science and STEM and is the STEM planning coordinator for Imhotep Charter High School. In the time that she has served in her role, she's revamped her school's curriculum to include an open heart surgery exercise, sheep heart dissection, and a crime scene investigation lab. She's also an education-focused entrepreneur. Shirley, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I want to make sure that we do highlight how your entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship is important to advancing the work, because not every school environment fosters innovation in the curriculum. So what is your organization outside of its classroom, and what's its mission and purpose?
Yeah, so my organization outside of the classroom is Neuro Advanced Academics, which is a learning firm that uses neuroscience-based practices to cultivate the innate genius in children. So we intentionally work to stimulate learning on a cellular and molecular level, doing things to intentionally grow the neuron and to help the neuron to make more connections. And we actually figure out how the child's brain communicates, or what language they communicate with. And so we do this to help standardize testing scores, which we have proven that this method works with increasing standardized testing scores, specifically in the socioeconomic disadvantaged communities, which is a major problem right now in education. And then also it helps for advanced learning with children, with toddlers and with babies and infants. So we have our 1-year-olds that come through if they start off at 4 months, by the time they're 1, they're reading. And as far as our program, we're teaching students from 3 to 5-year-olds calculus. So we actually taught 3 to 5-year-olds calculus, and when they entered into kindergarten, and they were students from all across the United States of America, and once they entered into kindergarten, they were automatically recommended to be tested into gifted. So all of the scholars that went through the program were either tested into gifted or recommended to advanced courses in kindergarten. So again, Neuro Advanced Academics is a learning firm that intentionally uses neuroscience-based practices to cultivate that genius in children.
That's amazing. And we often talk about pipelines or learning continuums, where we want students or young people, even in Europe, right, just to start being intentional about how we rear our young people, what they're learning, and you starting so early, and your students in the classroom or in high school, still connecting it through the workforce, gives us a chance to now bring in the technology. And we do that with Siobhan. Siobhan Hawthorne is the lead for marketing and outreach at Christiana Care's Gene Editing Institute. As a part of Siobhan's strategic role, she has introduced the CRISPR in a Box complete gene editing kit to STEM teachers in Delaware, and has forged the path to launch the kit throughout the country via national distributors. Siobhan, welcome to the roundtable.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. So community outreach. Communities can be obviously diverse. what are some of the areas that you are focused on when you have to communicate not with teachers, the community at large about the technology that you're introducing to teachers and students?
Exactly. So we started with relationships with the Delaware Department of Education. So one of the advantages of being in a small state is you can just walk over and say hi. And so that's real community. And they welcomed us in to their inner sanctum of curriculum planning. And we started to talk about how important this was. And we didn't have any arguments to that effect. So we really started with the teachers. And as we talked to more and more teachers, we had someone, Peg Enslin was my colleague who introduced me to high school teachers in STEM fields. And she started to think about to ask this question, and the response was like, now, we're ready now, please give us this. And what we did was we went out and we got some charitable donations so that we could pay for those kits in Delaware. So again, thinking about breaking down barriers to get to the educational tool, one thing that we know is that change is very hard. So here's this heavy kind of chemical reaction. It's not that it's in a box, but it's not that easy. You do need some scientific skills. You need to be a STEM teacher to handle this. And we're learning that, and we're learning how to encourage teachers to take this on, because it does require them to change their patterns of behaviors. We've also worked with a couple, you'll see in my presentation, we worked with a couple of universities that have outreach programs to urban and inner city youth, communities of color, where they have scholarships to come and do some lab exercises in the summer. So there's been an all hands on deck type of approach to this.
Beautiful. So I want to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of the opportunity here and the technology. If you are tuning in virtually, please feel free to use the chat as Siobhan goes through her presentation. If you have questions, thoughts that you'd like to share, or concerns. And we also have a microphone here with us live that Emily will share with anyone in the room that has any questions or thoughts that you'd like to share. So Siobhan.
Thank you. Thank you. Because it is a technological product, I thought I would bring some slides to show you what it is. So CRISPR in a box is all the chemicals and tools you need to run the reaction in a classroom. And we have worked with the National Science Foundation through a grant from them, with Delaware Tech, the community college system of Delaware, and Rockland Immunochemicals. So that box is thanks to them. They put that together, not me personally, thank goodness. So that is the box, and that is everything in it. So you see there, chemicals, reagents, this is everything you need to do gene editing. Oh, there we go, okay. You can advance it for me. Thank you. But before I get into a little bit more about the product, let me tell you about the Gene Editing Institute. So we're part of Christiana Care Health System in Northern Delaware, but we're a real functioning gene editing lab, and we have multiple branches. One is discovery research, just understanding how gene editing works. We have education and outreach, which is this product and a couple of other initiatives that we're working on. And then we have translational research. So this is perhaps what we're training the students of today for, so that they can grow up and do this work. Translational research is taking gene editing and trying it out to edit, for instance, we're working on cancer. So we're trying to disable solid tumors from their defense from chemotherapy. And we're having some pretty good success with that. And we're on an FDA journey where we will eventually be in clinical trials and offer this for humans. And as a health system, why we think that's so important is that my boss, you see him there in the corner, Dr. Eric Kamash, he was in the hallway in the cancer center, and he found out, what do oncologists need? And this was the need, because at that point, a lung cancer patient is out of options. So they're like, what if you could really help us get chemo to work. And that started us on our journey. And I mentioned an NSF grant, that's the National Science Foundation grant that we have now for over 6 years with Dell Tech. And the goal of that was to train the trainers. So these folks here are training community college instructors from all over the country. They get to fly into Delaware, although not recently with the darn pandemic. So this is, you know, really getting people to have their hands on, and we found that that's been so important. So, Neferteri, you did a good job explaining what CRISPR was. Now, if you want to know what's in CRISPR in a box in more detail, you can go to Rockland Immunochemicals and click on this manual. And this will tell you everything that's in the educational kit and how to use the protocol. Okay, so this was our road test. We were held up quite a bit over the pandemic years. Students were not in school. I'm hearing now through teachers that we've paid a price for that, with them not understanding how to use lab equipment, and we're falling behind from where they usually come into a class. So we did have this one opportunity in March of this year at St. George's Technical High School in Delaware. And you can see here, that was the first use of CRISPR in a box. And we kind of watched the kids work on this. And we had two kind of brave teachers step forward to try it out. And what we discovered was that we needed that bigger box. So we improved our product as a result of this field test. Next slide. Right, so you asked that great question about community engagement, and what we're finding is that this box can really be used as a tool by more advanced lab practitioners at the university level to bring high school students in and to say, if you want to work in gene editing someday, this is what gene editors do. They're in a lab, you see they have lab coats on. You are pipetting, you're moving chemicals around, you're following a very specific protocol, and that is the work. So this is really important to the whole philosophy of you can't be it unless you see it, and these kids can see it and consider it at least. And again, gene editing 360, this is an educational video series on our website that's available for free. And you see here, it's introduced by Dr. Janice Nevin, our CEO, very high priority to address sickle cell disease. That is one of the conditions out there that is very likely to be cured through a genetic therapy. And through that, we've engaged our sickle cell physicians to talk about this and to help them provide a call to action. So if you're African American, your family may be impacted by sickle cell disease, you can join that cause and you can be a part of that solution. And at one of our schools, what happened was, you start to hear someone who's impacted by cancer or Huntington's disease, which is a pretty serious genetic disease that you don't live quite a long life if you have it. And those conditions that are tied to specific genetic patterns are the targets for gene editing. So the fun part, this is where we were over the summer. There's our teacher, Mr. Elijah Taylor. He's at Aquaquinimink High School. He used the CRISPR in a box with his summer course. And I talked a lot about working with the Delaware Department of Education. They set up a full year curriculum and he tried it out. So very brave. You'll see some other pictures here. Exciting new cutting edge experiment for your students. That is my teacher wrote that, who works for me. Like, this is what it is to me. And that's what I would tell other teachers. And you could see, this is an equal opportunity science. This is not all white people. You see a diverse audience here. And that is terrific because it's an open field and it's something that folks can go into. And we have the micropipetting, an essential skill in gene editing. you'll see that there, and I'm sure folks who teach this know that it can be a little tricky to use these devices, but you'll have to do that to get through this experiment. So. Yes, and the Franklin Institute, we've been working with their STEM Scholars program, and they will also offer the kit. Last year they weren't in session, but we did virtual teaching with them. So this year, we will. And then this is my last slide. So when folks think about doing gene editing, this is using CRISPR. We've licensed CRISPR into this box. And this is where you can get it. You can get it from Rockland, and we're soon to be carried by VWR and Carolina Biological. So if you're a science teacher, you know those names. They're like the Sears catalog.
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, thank you for the explanation. Thank you for taking us along your journey.
Sure.
And I'm grateful that you brought up the comment about diversity, the photos that you showed. Sometimes it's not about equity. Sometimes it truly is about access that can impact equity. So where are you all in terms of the adoption in the region?
Mm-hmm. We're very early on, so we're here to ask for folks to try this kit out. We have just a few schools that are using this kit because they're just now in session. Aberquinimink was one. We've had the summer camps at Drexel. We had a camp that will come up at the Franklin Institute. We have two high schools in Delaware who will be teaching the course this year. And then we have a few others lined up behind that. So we're mostly in Delaware right now. So love Pennsylvania to come along. And you know, the thinking around access is really, if your school can't afford this, can we pitch this to some charitable foundation to get that exposure and access to an innovative science and technology for all kids, regardless of what their school budget is that year.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, we have Shirley as a part of this conversation. Rockland, that you showed, is a distributor of this box. It's actually in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. So it's not inaccessible. So Shirley, if you wouldn't mind joining the conversation, and anyone that is online that wants to ask a question or make a comment, please use the chat. Shirley, you are a classroom educator that is poised to adopt this technology. What would stop you from doing so?
Nothing at this point. Nothing would stop. I think that we are at a stage now, just going back a little bit, the current institution that I work for now, am a part of, Imhotep Charter High School, is an African-centered, meaning culturally inclusive, and STEM institution. And so they brought me on initially to increase standardized testing using neuroscience-based practices. And a part of that neuroscience-based practice is the incorporation of hands-on inquiry-based learning, and allowing the students to make a connection with what they're learning in the textbooks to actually allowing that to be innovative, right? And sparking that. So prior to or BC, before COVID, we were in the classroom actually, because our students, we have to go beyond now of the grandfather genetics. Mendel, we're thankful for his work, but our students have to really connect, you know, and it's more than just the P's now. So we presented with them genomics in two different settings, one with forensic science, and then where they had to actually, I set my classroom space, and I'm actually in my classroom right now. That's not a virtual background. So we actually set the space up to where when the students walked in, it was a crime scene with the body bag, and they had to go through and collect blood samples. They had to go through and collect the DNA, right? The next phase of that was now taking, you understand what DNA, you understand what genes are. Now let's look at Titan, where Titan is the moon around Saturn that that's very similar to Earth in the fact that it has nitrogen like Earth and these water-like cycles very similar. However, we can't survive there because of X, Y, and Z. So what you have to do as students is figure out how to manipulate the genes or our cells so that they can survive on Titan. So I think something like this, CRISPR, would be perfect at our institution, and nothing would hold us back except for just gaining more knowledge, and events like this with gaining awareness on how to actually incorporate this. But our students are ready, we're ready. And I think just the awareness of even knowing products like this exist would be the only thing inhibiting us.
And it's interesting because when I mentioned about access, you mentioned diversity, you talked about equity in your school. How can we ensure that we have maximum participation from students? It's not just for gifted students. It's not just for those who are on a specific track. What can we do as education stakeholders to support that?
Right. So I think one is getting professional developments to teach educators on how to incorporate this. It was funny, I was reading a study which was saying like professional developments are not great unless it's hands-on. So bringing in CRISPR, allowing us as educators to have professional development so we can support all of our students, and it's just not one facilitator or one educator with all of the knowledge, and then they're only able to support a small group set. But if we educated or brought in a professional development where it was a demonstration or hands-on so that all of us are knowledgeable and all of us are comfortable, then we can better serve our students.
So Phil, I see you. You're a part of that. Your group, the think tanks that you participate in are part of the workforce development and a driver behind the growth in our region, right? What are you hearing from some of the employers, whether it's gene editing specifically or the cell and gene therapy space that is such a hot button topic? How can we make that tie-in back to the classroom for some of the recommendations that Shirley mentioned?
Yeah, so I'm not directly hearing genomics, but I am hearing a lot of cell and gene therapy, and I'm also hearing a lot of connected health. So pipetting was talked about during the presentation, and I'm glad you brought that up. Just a quick story in relation to pipetting. So the Science Center runs a program for adult learners in partnership with eClose Institute, and we reach out into the community and we do focus on adult learners. But one of the biggest things that came out of it that we didn't expect is that a lot of these adult learners are parents. So during our first session, we had someone who was they were participating, but they were looking over to the corner. And at the end of the time with the participants, we asked the individual, we said, hey, we saw that you were looking into the corner a lot. You know, what were you doing? Her high school son was in the corner learning while we were doing the instruction. So we were doing instruction on ELISA assay, we were doing instruction on microscopy. We wanted to tie in to kind of like PCR and everything else, but it's one of these things where the work that we're doing is having a domino effect where students are seeing their parents do something scientific and current too. I'm glad Gregor Mendel was brought up, because as soon as like Gregor Mendel was brought up, like I remember that square. I remember like hitting the letters. I don't know. That was kind of traumatic for me. I just didn't like that square, but I learned a lot, right? I learned so much during that time, but at the same time, there's so many new things, new technologies that are being developed in the sense that we have all these tools, we have new instruments, we have all these really big pieces of equipment, and only a handful of people really know how to use them. So the awareness is really important. I think I really dig the idea that multiple individuals should know these techniques and be able to teach students. One, because, you know, if that one person has to leave for any specific reason, that knowledge goes away with them. And because there are going to be multiple people at the school, they can bring in others, new teachers who come on board, they can incorporate that into their learning, into professional development. So the biggest thing that I'm hearing is, you know, talent is extraordinarily important, right? different companies invest different, periods of time, because a lot of companies, their biggest priority is capital. They want, the money to make sure they're able to do the work that they're doing. But a really, really big kind of like component to that, and especially for the region, is investing into talent of your future. And that goes into the future of jobs, that goes into individuals who are, sitting in high school, who have these brilliant minds, but don't have access, right? And then continuing to make sure that that exposure opportunity is there. So I think I wanted to answer one of the questions that you mentioned, Neferteri. How can we, encourage students to kind of go into this field? We can also bring in people that look like them into this. And I'm glad I saw that picture during the presentation. That was perfect. I don't know I can't remember the teacher's name, but that's exactly what's needed, and that's needed now.
Wow. So professional development was said by you, Phil, and Shirley talked about it as well. Daniel, in the chat, you dropped a message. You have some thoughts about professional development. Will you share?
Yeah, totally. I was just pulling off of an experience I've had that I won't bore everyone with, but I think oftentimes when professional development is super, super critical for the content, right? And the ways that educators are going to engage with that content and hopefully inspire their students to engage with that content consistently. But oftentimes what happens is administrators are left out of that professional development opportunity and experience. And so they don't see the relation, right? They might not see how it aligns with curriculum, how it's an investment that needs to be made. And even with aligning with like next generation science standards, they don't necessarily know how to evaluate these kinds of experiences. And so if you don't have principals or vice principals or just school administrators that are part of that professional development, they're left out of that experience, and they're also left out of buy-in, right? They don't have that investment because they didn't have to be in the same space and learn the same content. To Phil's point, right? That's succession planning, right? If you have somebody who leaves and takes that knowledge with them, there's at least an administrator there who says, I went through that and it's really valuable experience. We need to make sure that this continues. They have that ownership, that buy-in. So if professional development becomes sort of a pathway for access here, I would encourage you to put administrators, educators, and even one or two parents or guardians into the space so that they can support that full ecosystem around that student, that youth.
You said something that was key there. You threw in the parents as stakeholders in this. I know Phil had said it too, in terms of young people observing their parents as they're learning. But I know this isn't specifically a question that should be directed at you in your organization, but the ethics around editing genes, right? It doesn't require that you go into the laboratory to participate in that conversation. Phil, or even Shirley, because you're in the classroom, because you have the parent-teacher conferences, what are some things that we can be proactive, at least thinking about, in terms of having ethical conversations around the technology and what it means for diverse communities?
You were breaking up. I'm so sorry. Do you mind repeating the question? My apologies.
No worries. It's not going to come out exactly the way it did the first time. So thinking about your specific school, African Centered Charter High School, focused on STEM education, we can look at stories like Henrietta Lacks, where it's commonly known that she was taken advantage of, right? So we're in a space right now where we're talking about sickle cell anemia that disproportionately impacts African Americans, and editing the genes as a possible solution, and how some of the young people from that community can be a part of that solution. So how can we be proactive in bridging the conversation with the community so it is more easily adopted or accepted, or that they're in a position to voice any concerns that they have?
Hey, yes. So actually this summer, I had to run our STEM program and STEM summer program. And one of the courses that I created was unethical medical practices in the Black and Brown community. So one, teaching them about these various cases, such as Henrietta Lacks, such as the Tuskegee study, and such as making it even more relevant to why African Americans are scared to get the vaccine, or they're a little hesitant about this vaccine. And so teaching them that these things did exist, it did happen, now thinking about ways to actually find solutions on going forward. And that is one thing is telling them, giving them, I think Phil said it earlier, was not only allowing them to see people in the field, but seeing themselves that they can be a part of at the table creating, or how would you do this differently? Or how would you strategically plan so this won't happen again in the future? So I think giving them, presenting the cases to them in classes, in a classroom setting, and then also what they did, bridging it back to the community after they learned about it. We had a night where the parents and the community came out, and guess who spoke about it? It was the students. So then the students taught their parents, the students taught their community, and it opened up then a really good conversation about the COVID vaccination and about the fears of it, and addressing what has happened in the past. So I think things like that, of teaching our students, and so they can be the leaders and go out and teach the community.
Phil, you're shaking your head like it's right on mark.
I have nothing else to add. That hit the nail on the head. Yep, that's it.
So one of the things that we often don't think about until the pipeline is developed to a point is the prospect of internships, is the job placement, is the experience that a high school junior or senior can have when they're starting to make decisions about higher ed or either going into the workforce. Because we're so early in this, it seems like we haven't missed the boat. Will you tell us, Phil, about the BULB program? And obviously this is not targeted towards high school students, but those who are a little further along in their career pathway.
Sure. So the BULB program, as I mentioned, was developed in partnership with eClose Institute. The folks from eClose Institute served as our instructors. They also do this on a larger scale. So they work with young people, they work with middle school and high school students. But more importantly, the thing that kind of attracted me to partnering with them in the first place is that they work with teachers. They do kind of a trainer situation where they work with high school teachers, and they have a lot of really amazing opportunities for teachers to come in, learn a whole bunch of things that they're teaching, more specifically surrounding Drosophila, and then focusing on cancer research, but then really bridging that gap between teachers being able to teach this in the classroom. The BULB program really kind of focuses on making sure that Philadelphia residents have the baseline knowledge and hands-on skills to either serve in a lab technician related role, if that's a little bit further out their reach, focusing on business operations roles. So there may be an individual that's been working in customer service for 17 years, someone that have maybe been a nurse, and then, the pandemic has pushed a lot of upskilling and reskilling. What we're trying to do is focus on making sure that folks who did not have that opportunity to go to college or go to school, or did not have the financial means to get a four-year degree or plus, that they have some additional skills in relation to what we're hearing from employers. So employers are letting us know, hey, if we need somebody in this space, this is at the very minimum level. This is what they need to know. I will add that in our fall 2020 cohort, we did have a recently graduating high school senior. So he just graduated a few months prior to that, and he was great. And the principal reached out to us and said, hey, listen, I've read about your program. I know that your program is really is focused on adults, but can this recently graduating high school student participate? We said yes. he was phenomenal in it. He took that information and took it back to his high school. But I want to bring him up primarily because it wasn't the Science Center that signed off on him being one of the 12 participants for that fall program. It was our selection committee, and our selection committee is made up of STEM individuals, so STEM professionals across the gambit, mostly life science, some tech, some in different places. We have folks from Idera Pharma, Century Therapeutics, Integral Molecular. These are the folks who were reviewing applications. They understood what our program was, and they chose the individuals for the cohort. So it was the principal reaching out and saying this student would be great. It was the selection committee made up of STEM professionals that looked at his application and said, this young man would be perfect for this program. Make sure that he's connected, or they gave him a top rating. I bring all this up because the internship part of it is still really critical. And I think it's been true for a long period of time that, you know, if a vice president or someone working at a company have a niece or nephew, they can get into kind of like an internship space fairly easily, just because of, who they know. I think a large part of what I've done, in my previous role and kind of bleeding into my new role working with adults is really being able to enhance the network of the individuals that we serve. So making sure that they have a really, really great LinkedIn, making sure that they have really great opportunities. If they're shy or if they're nervous about, engaging with people either online, in person, kind of focusing on what that means in terms of being able to market yourself in a way that's professional, in a way that will catch people's eye, and then focus on making sure that the individual, whoever they are, can definitely take advantage of the opportunities that's set before them. And in my work with high school students, more importantly at Roxborough High School, we would bring STEM professionals in from all different walks of life. And, students would let me know after the presentation and say, Mr. Phil, like, that's not for me. And I'm like, that's great. Check that off. This is something that you don't want to do. Great. There's all these other fields of science and technology that's out there. Let's bring those folks in and let's see what you like. So I veered off topic, I think, a little bit, but the internship part of all of this, still really critical, still really important. And the idea that there are not enough connections is disheartening to me, but at the same time, like, that's part of why I do the work that I do.
I think it's so important, and I want to maximize having you as a part of the conversation with Siobhan and with Shirley, because I think you can use your lived experience, professional experience to help us understand how to be proactive with this instead of reactive in terms of those adjacent roles to this technology, the support roles, as well as the diversity in it. How do you recommend that an educator like Shirley builds an ecosystem around her school and her students with this technology?
I think a lot of it is, Shirley mentioned really some phenomenal things. Definitely want to follow up with you about Imhotep and the crime scene investigation. I will put on like a uniform just to pretend to be a student to walk into your classroom. I don't have any firm recommendations. My very specific conversations and experience with both educators, community, as well as companies really lends itself towards, being able to be prepared as much as humanly possible for the jobs of the future. And if we're talking about genomes, genetics, everything that we've gone through with the pandemic, being able to, amplify DNA by using a polymerase chain reaction, a PCR, is extremely important, right? How many people know how to do that? How many people in the community, in diverse communities, know how to do that, right? What's the point from A to Z that a student needs to take from 11th grade year to, if they want to go to college, to their senior year in college? If they don't decide to do that, how can they connect to opportunities? I think a lot of the work is already being done. A really big kind of push or component, or just a recommendation, is to continue to make those connections. I was reading a little bit more just in preparation for this about the Human Genome Project, and directly after that, how much awareness was was pushed in the country towards the Genome Project. But then what that did is it exposed a whole bunch of holes in education where, you know, we started to find out that there were schools that didn't have any genetic classes or didn't even learn about anything related to this. So a big push from a whole bunch of different centers and companies across the country kind of focused on this. And the one thing I'll leave you all with is that it can't be one company, it can't be one group of scientists, it can't be one teacher, it can't be one school. It has to be partnerships to make all of this work. And that's critical. We have to pit the BS of politics and all that stuff aside. At the end of the day, it's about making sure it's about the kids. If you want to look further than that, it's about making sure that our national economy is set up for success.
I agree. And we're coming down to the wire with time. So I'd like to ask both of you, starting with you, Siobhan, what can we do as a community to help support your work?
I think the general awareness is helpful. You talked about some concerns around gene editing. We could go one way or the other. We can see it as a cure for cancer, or we can see it as this scary thing. So getting kids used to understanding how it works and being a part of the solution as a cause. So this is a career that you can go into. There are hard skills. It's good paying work. And these are opportunities that we don't have solutions for right now. Big Pharma does not have solutions for them. We're looking to the next generation to create something with this technology that improves humanity. So that's a pretty heavy lift. And I think starting with parents and teachers are really important, and I really appreciate the PD comment, professional development comment. We'll do as much of that as we can, but that is where this will just take a little while to get out there. But once we've seen it offered in Delaware schools, that summer course was opt-in, and it was oversubscribed. I think they had 35 seats, and they had 50 people in the waiting list. So to say that there is interest in this it is out there. How can we really make ourselves competitive as a country and as a region? So we're here for that. We're here to participate with all of you in doing that.
Very good. So Phil, I heard from you collaboration. I hear awareness and education. So lastly, Shirley, how can we support you in this work that you have ahead?
Yeah, I'm going to say advocacy. So with that, we want to make sure that our students are prepared, as Phil was saying, with these skills for our economy. That's extremely important, but also being an advocate, talking to policymakers and lawmakers in education, because schools like ours, where we have minority students, we are being judged on our ability to pass the standardized test, right? And so I want to say like that, I think that's a big thing that's missed, is being an advocate, talking to these policymakers and allowing them to see that children learn in different ways, in various ways. Why not try this way through STEM-based learning and creating a solution where we test how much our students know based upon this? So I definitely think that advocacy and really getting them to see where we should be pushing for skills that are going to help push our economy. I love how Phil articulated that. And then also, the professional development aspect, I think is huge. And I think it was Daniel that said that. I love that about bringing the entire community. So allowing the professional developments, not just to be for educators, but bringing in parents, bringing in definitely administration, so that fire can continue even if one educator leaves.
Beautiful. So collaboration, awareness, and advocacy. Thank you all very much for spending your time, both in person and virtually, to our roundtable segment, Designing to Disrupt and Reimagining Education. Have a great evening.
Thank you.